Alyssa Grant stepped out of the fitness center feeling refreshed after her morning workout. The sun was bright, the sky was clear, and the streets were full of people rushing to their jobs, meeting friends, or running errands. She blended perfectly into the crowd with her simple black leggings, a navy blue hoodie, and her gym bag hanging loosely from her shoulder. She looked like any ordinary woman enjoying her day, calm and peaceful, with no sign of the intense training and experience hidden beneath her quiet smile. She walked down the main street, taking her time, enjoying the warm air and the buzz of the city. Vendors called out to customers, cars honked impatiently, and children laughed as they ran past her. It was a normal, uneventful afternoon, the kind of day that didn't warn anyone that danger was just moments away. Alyssa moved naturally, but her sharp senses noticed everything around her, a habit she couldn't turn off even when she wasn't on duty. Being part of the Navy had taught her to always stay aware, always stay prepared, even on peaceful days like this. As she crossed the busy square, she stopped for a moment near a smoothie cart. The sweet smell of fresh fruit filled the air, and she considered getting a drink. She didn't know that just a short distance away, 5 men were already watching her closely. They stood near a bus stop, pretending to chat, but their eyes kept returning to her again and again. Their names were Marcus, Leon, Trey, Dev, and Rico, and they were known in the area for causing trouble. They spent most of their days hanging around, looking for opportunities to intimidate people or take advantage of those who seemed weak or distracted. When Marcus first noticed Alyssa, he nudged the others and nodded toward her. She looked calm, alone, and harmless. Her gym clothes and simple appearance made them think she was an easy target, someone they could approach without much resistance. They watched her pay for her drink, watched her adjust her bag, and watched her walk slowly down the street with relaxed confidence. To them, she looked like the type of person who wouldn't fight back. Alyssa had no idea she had attracted their attention. She walked past a bakery, then a bookstore, enjoying the simple beauty of ordinary life. She wasn't thinking about danger or trouble. She was thinking about calling her sister later, maybe cooking something nice for dinner, maybe watching a movie in the evening. It was supposed to be a normal day, free from the stress of missions and responsibilities. But as she headed toward a quieter block, her instincts suddenly whispered to her. Something felt off. It wasn't obvious, but she sensed movement behind her that didn't match the casual flow of the street. It was subtle, like an extra pair of footsteps slightly out of rhythm with the rest of the crowd. She didn't turn around right away. Instead, she slowed her pace just a little, letting her ears catch more of the environment. Her heartbeat stayed calm, steady, controlled. Years of training had taught her to trust these small signals. Behind her, the 5 men had started following. At first, they moved as a group, but then they began spreading out, keeping a little distance between each other to look less suspicious. Marcus walked on the left side of the sidewalk, pretending to check his phone. Trey and Dev walked behind her, talking quietly. Leon and Rico stayed farther back, watching her from different angles. They believed she hadn't noticed them. They believed they were in control. Alyssa kept walking. She didn't want to cause a scene, and she didn't want to attract unnecessary attention. She needed more information. Were they really following her, or was it just a coincidence? She walked past a street performer playing guitar. She walked past a man selling sunglasses on a small table. Each time she glanced casually into a window or reflective surface, she confirmed her suspicion. The same men were still behind her. But she didn't panic. Fear never crossed her face. Instead, she breathed slowly, letting her mind analyze the situation the same way she had done many times before during missions. She carefully observed their distance, their pace, their body language. They were following her purposely. They weren't just passing by. They had locked onto her as their target. Still, she didn't react. Reacting too early could make things worse. She continued walking calmly, her step steady, her posture relaxed, as if nothing unusual was happening. Inside, though, she was fully awake, fully aware, ready for anything. Her peaceful afternoon had changed without warning, turning from an ordinary day into something far more dangerous. The crowd thinned as she moved toward a quieter part of the street, a place with fewer people and fewer eyes watching. The 5 men saw this as their chance. They exchanged quick looks, silently agreeing that this was the moment they had been waiting for. Alyssa felt it too. She could sense their movements becoming more focused, more intentional. She tightened her grip on her gym bag, not out of fear, but out of readiness. She didn't want trouble. She didn't want to fight. She just wanted her peaceful day back. But she also knew she wouldn't let anyone harm her. She wasn't the helpless woman they assumed she was. She was far from it. What was supposed to be a normal afternoon was slowly turning into a moment that would shock everyone involved, a moment that would reveal who Alyssa truly was, and what she was capable of. The 5 men didn't rush after Alyssa at first. They moved slowly, pretending that they were only walking in the same direction, but each of them had already made up his mind. Marcus, the tallest and oldest of the group, was the one who had first spotted her. He always acted like the leader, and the others usually followed whatever he decided. He kept his eyes on Alyssa with a sharp, greedy look, imagining how easily he could scare her if she ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time. Leon walked beside him, hands in his pockets, chewing gum loudly. He wasn't as bold as Marcus, but he liked being part of the group because it made him feel powerful. Trey, Dev, and Rico walked behind them, all whispering quietly about how simple this job would be. None of them had any idea who Alyssa really was. To them, she was just another woman who looked alone and unaware. The men waited until Alyssa moved farther away from the busy market area. They didn't want too many witnesses. When they saw her turn onto a quieter street lined with old apartment buildings and small shops, Marcus smirked. "Now is the time," he muttered under his breath. The others nodded quickly, eager to impress him. Alyssa kept walking, but her instincts were sharper than ever. She could feel the pressure of their presence behind her. She didn't look back, but she knew their distance was closing. She noticed how the street suddenly felt too empty, how the noise of the city faded behind her, and how the footsteps behind her became clearer. Her heart stayed steady, but her mind was already creating a plan. She walked past a laundry shop and a small convenience store. On the corner was a narrow alleyway that she normally wouldn't take, but she needed to understand what the men wanted. If she turned into the alley and they followed, she would have her answer. It was a calculated risk, but she preferred open confrontation over being attacked from behind. Marcus noticed her slow as she approached the alley, and he whispered, "She's looking for a shorter path. This is perfect." He didn't realize Alyssa was actually leading them into a space where she could control the situation. The men believed they were the hunters, but they were already walking into a trap they didn't understand. As soon as Alyssa turned into the alley, the 5 men quickened their steps. Leon snickered. "She's alone now." Rico rubbed his hands together, thinking this was going to be fun. Dev checked the alley entrance to make sure no one else was watching. All of them felt confident, almost excited. Their mistake was thinking their numbers guaranteed their success. Inside the alley, Alyssa didn't change her pace. She didn't show fear. She simply walked calmly, her eyes scanning the surroundings. The walls were high, the ground was cracked, and the alley led to another street on the other side. She stopped near the center, pretending to adjust her bag strap. She could hear the footsteps behind her growing louder. They were close now, too close to pretend anything anymore. The men entered the alley with boldness. Marcus stepped in first, shoulders pushed back, chin lifted as if he had already won. Leon glanced around and snorted. "Easy," he whispered. Trey, Dev, and Rico followed, all of them thinking they had full control. Alyssa felt their presence behind her, but she still didn't turn around. Her calmness confused the men for a moment. Usually, people panicked when they realized they were cornered, but Alyssa seemed almost relaxed. Marcus frowned slightly, not expecting this kind of attitude. "Hey, he called out aggressively. "Where you rushing off to?" Alyssa turned her head slowly, giving him a brief look. Her expression was unreadable. Not scared. Not angry. Just steady. The lack of fear annoyed Marcus. He took a step closer, expecting her to back away. Instead, she held her ground. Leon moved to the left side of the alley, Trey moved to the right, and Rico and Dev stayed behind Marcus, slowly forming a loose circle around her. They believed they were closing the trap. Alyssa noticed every movement, every angle, every position. Her mind stayed quiet, focused. She had assessed situations far more dangerous than this. The men thought they were intimidating her, but Alyssa was already planning exactly how she would handle each of them if they tried anything. Marcus crossed his arms. "You look a little lost," he said with a mocking smile. "Maybe we can help you." Alyssa didn't respond. Her silence made him even more irritated. He took another slow step toward her, trying to appear dominant. "Don't ignore me," he growled. The others chuckled, believing the situation was under their control. They didn't understand that their confidence was building a storm they were not prepared for. Each step they took brought them closer to a truth that would shock them more than anything in their lives. Alyssa stood still, watching, waiting. She didn't want violence. She didn't want trouble. But if these men forced her hand, they were about to discover who she truly was, one move at a time. A quiet stillness settled in the alley, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that arrives before something dangerous happens. Alyssa stood calmly, one hand lightly holding the strap of her gym bag, her eyes steady as they observed the 5 men surrounding her. She didn't rush, didn't panic, and didn't move unnecessarily. Her mind stayed clear, noticing every detail, Marcus inching closer, Leon scanning the alley for exits, Trey cracking his knuckles as if preparing for something, Dev shifting anxiously, and Rico smirking with misplaced confidence. Marcus tried again to intimidate her. "You deaf?" he asked, stepping closer. His shadow stretched across the cracked pavement, reaching her feet. "I asked you a question. You too good to answer." Alyssa's voice, when she finally spoke, was soft and controlled. "I'm not lost," she said simply. Her calmness irritated him even more. He wasn't used to being ignored or dismissed. Most people trembled at his tone. But this woman didn't flinch, didn't look scared, didn't give him the reaction he wanted. Leon leaned against the wall, licking his lips as if he were bored. "Come on, Marcus," he said. "Stop talking. Let's get this over with." Rico laughed in agreement. "Yeah, she ain't gonna do nothing. Look at her. Tiny thing." Alyssa heard everything, but she didn't react. Inside, she was already preparing. She wasn't worried about their words. She was studying their patterns, their footing, their distance from her, the direction each one would move if things escalated. She knew an untrained group like this usually made predictable mistakes. She just needed to wait for the right second. Marcus finally lost his patience. He reached out suddenly, grabbing the strap of her bag, expecting her to stumble or pull away. But Alyssa didn't move. Instead, she held the strap firmly. For a moment, Marcus felt a strange resistance, stronger than he expected, from someone her size. "Let go," he demanded. Alyssa didn't let go. She looked directly into his eyes, and something in her expression made Marcus hesitate. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was confidence, quiet, dangerous confidence. Trey stepped forward, trying to look tough. "Just grab her stuff, man," he urged. "She's not even fighting. How hard can this be?" That was the moment Alyssa chose to act. With one swift movement, she twisted her arm, using Marcus's own grip against him. Before he understood what happened, his balance shifted unexpectedly. Alyssa stepped aside, grabbed his wrist, and pulled sharply. Marcus stumbled and dropped to his knee, letting out a surprised grunt. He had never experienced someone move that fast. He reached out to grab her again, but Alyssa stepped back effortlessly, avoiding him with precise control. Trey lunged forward to help Marcus, but Alyssa reacted instantly. She turned her body sideways, grabbed Trey's arm, and redirected his force. His momentum worked against him, sending him stumbling forward into the wall. His shoulder smacked the bricks, and he groaned in pain. Dev blinked in shock. What just happened? Rico cursed loudly. Man, she knows something. Get her. They all expected Alyssa to run. Instead, she stood her ground, her posture steady, her breathing calm. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in readiness. Everything they planned was falling apart, but they were too stubborn to stop. Leon pushed off the wall and charged at her. Alyssa sidestepped gracefully, her movements smooth like water. With a quick shift of her weight, she swept her foot in a controlled arc, knocking Leon's legs out from under him. He hit the ground with a sharp thud, shocked and winded. Dev, the most nervous of the group, backed away instinctively. He didn't want to be next, but fear and pride trapped him in place. Marcus, now furious and embarrassed, stood up with anger burning in his eyes. You think you're tough, he hissed. Alyssa didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her silence was stronger than anything she could have said. Marcus swung his fist at her, intending to end the fight quickly. But Alyssa moved before his punch even reached her. She ducked slightly to the side, grabbed his forearm, and twisted just enough to unbalance him. She didn't break anything. She didn't even strike him. She just controlled his motion with calculated precision until he fell again, hitting the ground with a frustrated growl. Rico, the last one standing, hesitated. His confidence shrank as he watched his entire group fall apart. He tried to act brave, but uncertainty shook his hands. What are you? He demanded. Alyssa took one step forward, and Rico stepped back instantly. He realized he had misjudged her completely. Walk away, she said quietly. Her voice wasn't loud. It wasn't fierce. But it carried a strength that none of them could understand. Rico looked around at his friends, groaning, shocked, unable to believe what had just happened. None of them had seen such control, such precision, such skill. And Alyssa hadn't even broken a sweat. The men stared at her, finally beginning to understand that this woman was not who they thought she was. Not even close. For a long moment, the alley stayed silent except for the heavy breathing of the 5 men who had just been taken down by one woman. Alyssa stood in the center of the alley, calm and steady, her eyes following their movements carefully. She wasn't proud of what happened, and she took no pleasure in hurting anyone. But these men had forced her hand, and she had only used the minimum force necessary to protect herself. Still, she could tell by their expressions that they had never experienced anything like this before. Marcus struggled back to his feet, his pride wounded more than his body. His forehead was damp with sweat, and his hands trembled with anger and shock. You, who do you think you are? He spat out, wiping dust from his clothes. No regular woman fights like that. Alyssa didn't answer. She kept her face expressionless, which only made Marcus more frustrated. His voice rose, desperate to regain control. You think you can embarrass us? In our neighborhood? Leon groaned from the ground, holding his side where he had fallen. Marcus, leave it, he whispered. His courage had drained out of him completely. He wasn't interested in fighting someone who could drop him with one smooth move. But Marcus didn't listen. His pride refused to let him retreat. Get up, he ordered the others. We're not done. Rico and Dev looked at each other nervously. They had seen enough to know this fight was not one they could win. Trey pushed himself away from the wall, shaking his sore arm, and muttered, Man, I'm not doing this again. She's not normal. Marcus glared at them, furious that they were backing down. He felt the situation slipping away, and that terrified him more than anything. Fine, he growled. Then I'll finish this myself. Alyssa watched him approach again. His movements were sloppy now, driven by anger rather than control. She didn't want to hurt him more, but she knew he wasn't going to stop unless something broke his pride completely. She braced herself for whatever came next. But before Marcus could reach her, another voice suddenly echoed through the alley. Hey! What's going on here? Everyone froze. A police officer stood at the alley entrance, hand resting near his radio, his eyes sharp as he scanned the scene. His uniform was crisp, and his stance was strong, showing he wasn't new to dealing with trouble. Alyssa remained calm, lowering her hands slightly. Marcus stiffened, panic flashing across his face. The officer started walking toward them, his voice firm. Step back from the lady, he warned Marcus. Marcus quickly tried to change his expression, forcing a harmless smile. Officer, this is just a misunderstanding, he said. We were just... Enough, the officer interrupted. His voice left no room for lies. Leon, still on the ground, scrambled to sit up. Dev stepped away from Alyssa, trying to look innocent. Rico lifted both hands slowly as if showing he wasn't part of anything. The officer finally faced Alyssa. Ma'am, are you okay? She nodded politely. I'm fine. You sure? He asked, noticing the tense positions of the men. I handled it, she replied simply. The officer raised an eyebrow. He studied the men, 5 of them, all bruised or shaken, and then looked back at Alyssa, who stood untouched, calm, and in perfect control. Something didn't add up, but he didn't question it, not yet. Marcus tried to speak again. Look, man. The officer cut him off with a stern glare. I wasn't asking you. Marcus swallowed his anger and stepped back. The officer walked closer to Alyssa and lowered his voice. You handled it, how? Alyssa met his eyes for a moment. She debated whether to tell him who she really was. But she wasn't looking for recognition or special treatment. She simply gave him a small nod and said, self-defense training. The officer studied her carefully, noticing the steadiness of her posture, the controlled way she breathed, and the absolute lack of fear in her eyes. Whoever she wasn't normal. He nodded slowly. If you want to press charges, we can handle it right now. Alyssa looked at the men. Marcus glared at her with pure resentment, but the others looked terrified. She could almost hear the thoughts running through their heads. They had misjudged her from the very beginning. No, she said. I don't want to press charges. I just want to leave. The officer hesitated but finally nodded. All right. But I'll be taking statements. Marcus groaned in frustration, but he didn't dare argue with the officer. The officer stepped aside and gestured for Alyssa to walk past him. As she reached him, he lowered his voice again. Ma'am, you're not telling me everything, are you? Alyssa paused, then smiled gently. Not today. She walked out of the alley, her steps quiet and controlled. Behind her, the 5 men stood frozen, trying to understand what had just happened. None of them knew that the truth about her identity was about to come out soon, in a way they never expected, one that would change everything they thought they knew about her. The officer escorted Alyssa out of the alley, walking beside her like a silent guardian. Neither of them spoke at first. Alyssa didn't look shaken, but the officer kept glancing at her, trying to understand how someone so calm had defended herself against 5 men without a single scratch. When they reached the main street, he finally broke the silence. Ma'am, he said carefully, I've been a police officer for 12 years. I've seen a lot. But what happened back there, that wasn't normal self-defense. Alyssa adjusted her bag and gave him a polite nod. I've had some training, she replied softly. Some, he repeated, raising an eyebrow. You took down 5 grown men like it was nothing. Her smile didn't fade, but she didn't answer him directly. Instead, she said, thank you for stepping in. He studied her face for a moment, recognizing that pushing her for answers wouldn't work. "Just doing my job," he said simply. Alyssa walked away, blending back into the normal rhythm of the city. But inside, she felt something she didn't want to admit: disappointment. She hated situations like this. She wanted to live quietly, away from danger, away from violence, away from reminders of the life she had left behind. But trouble always seemed to find her, even on an ordinary afternoon. Meanwhile, back in the alley, the 5 men were still recovering from the shock. The officer had separated them and demanded explanations, but their stories were full of lies, covering up their intentions, blaming each other, avoiding responsibility. Yet one thing was clear in all their voices: fear. Marcus rubbed his wrist, still struggling to understand how he'd been overpowered. "Who was she?" he muttered. Trey shook his head. "I don't know, man, but she's dangerous." Rico frowned. "She ain't just dangerous, she's trained. Like military trained." Leon, still nursing his bruised side, whispered shakily, "No woman moves like that unless she's something big." Dev looked at them all with wide eyes. "Guys, what if she's a soldier?" Marcus scoffed at the idea but didn't have another explanation. His pride wanted to reject the thought. His fear didn't. The officer finished questioning them and wrote a few notes before dismissing them. "You're lucky she didn't press charges," he warned. "If I see any of you causing trouble again, it won't be this easy." The men nodded quickly, eager to escape the officer's presence. But Marcus didn't plan on forgetting this incident. His pride had been crushed, and the humiliation burned inside him. As they walked away from the alley, he clenched his jaw and whispered to his group, "Find out who she is. I don't care how. I need to know." Trey raised an eyebrow. "Why? So you can go after her again? Are you insane? She'll break us in half." But Marcus wasn't listening. For him, this wasn't about danger anymore, it was about revenge. Later that evening, Alyssa returned to her apartment, a small but cozy place on the 4th floor of an older building. She locked the door behind her, letting out a slow breath as she placed her bag on the couch. The fight hadn't tired her physically, but emotionally, it brought back old memories she worked hard to bury. Her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it and saw a message from an unknown number. Normally she ignored such things, but this one made her stop. "Still keeping your skills sharp, operator." Alyssa's heart skipped a beat, not out of fear, but annoyance. Only one person used that nickname. She dialed the number immediately. A familiar voice answered on the first ring. "Captain Reynolds," she said flatly, "you're not supposed to contact me." Her former commanding officer sighed. "I heard what happened today." "That was private," she replied, tightening her grip on the phone. "Nothing is private when you're who you are," he said gently. "You left the Navy, yes. But your name still means something. People notice when a former Navy operator shuts down 5 men in an alley." Alyssa paced across her living room. "I didn't want trouble." "I know," he said softly. "But trouble finds people like us. You can't hide what you are, not forever." She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of his words. Captain Reynolds continued, "Alyssa, those men won't let this go. And soon, they'll learn the truth. Be ready." Alyssa ended the call without answering. She stood silently for a moment, staring out her window at the city lights. The life she tried to leave behind was already catching up. And those 5 men had no idea how close they were to discovering the truth. A truth that would shake them more than the fight itself. The neighborhood grew quiet after the police cars left, but the silence was heavy, almost tense. People stayed outside their homes longer than usual, whispering to each other about what had just happened. Some were shocked, some were confused, and others felt guilty for assuming the worst before knowing the truth. Maya, however, did not care about the stares or the conversations. She had lived most of her life being misunderstood, and she did not expect strangers to change overnight. What mattered to her now was making sure everything was handled the right way. She stood near the police SUV, talking calmly with the officers who had arrived after the call. One of them kept glancing at her with deep respect, as if he still could not believe that she was the same woman the 5 men had tried to corner. Maya answered every question clearly, explaining who she was, what she saw, and how she acted out of self-defense. She spoke in a steady tone, with no anger and no fear. It was obvious she was trained, but it was also obvious she had a kind of discipline that came only from someone who had seen the worst parts of the world. A few feet away, the 5 men sat on the curb with their hands cuffed. Their attitudes had completely changed. The loud ones were silent, the arrogant ones avoided eye contact, and the overconfident ones looked almost embarrassed. One of them kept muttering apologies under his breath, hoping Maya would hear, but she did not respond. She knew those apologies were not for her, they were for themselves, an attempt to soften the weight of their own actions. The lead officer spoke quietly with Maya. "You handled yourself well," he said. "Most people would panic, but you stayed controlled." Maya simply nodded. "Training," she said, offering a small smile. "And experience." The officer hesitated. "If you ever think about joining law enforcement after your service, we could use people like you. People who stay calm." She did not say yes and she did not say no. She respected police officers, but she had lived a life full of missions, chaos, and secrets. She was not sure she wanted another uniform after this one. After the officers finished questioning her, they stepped away to speak with witnesses. Maya finally allowed herself to breathe. She scanned the street one more time, noticing the group of neighbors who had gathered on the sidewalk. Some of them lifted their hands in small, apologetic gestures. Others simply looked down. But then, an elderly woman stepped forward. The woman had watched everything from the beginning. Her voice was trembling, but her eyes were warm as she said, "I'm sorry, dear. People judge too fast these days. I'm just glad you're safe. You were brave." Maya smiled softly. "Thank you," she said. "But I wasn't being brave. I was just protecting myself." "You did more than that," the woman replied. "You showed them something they won't forget." Maya appreciated the kindness. It felt rare in moments like this, almost surprising. She placed a gentle hand on the woman's arm before walking away. Meanwhile, the officers escorted the 5 men toward the police van. One of the men tried to speak to her as he passed. "We didn't know who you were," he said. "We thought." Maya cut him off with a calm look. "You didn't need to know who I was," she said. "You just needed to know how to treat people." The man lowered his head, and the officers continued leading him away without another word. After they were gone, Maya stood at the edge of the street for a moment. The sun had lowered, painting the sky with orange and gold, and the world felt quieter than before. She felt the weight of what happened, but she refused to be defined by it. She had faced far worse in places no one would ever know about. What mattered to her now was moving forward. As she walked toward her car, her phone buzzed. It was a message from her commanding officer: "You handled the situation well. Proud of you. Report tomorrow morning." She smiled to herself. Life never gave her a break, but she did not expect one. She unlocked her car door and glanced back one last time at the street where everything had unfolded. People were still watching her, but this time, their eyes held something different. Not fear. Not suspicion. Something closer to respect. Maya took a deep breath, got inside her car, and drove away, unaware that what happened today would soon become the lesson this neighborhood needed most, one they would never forget. The city streets were quieter that evening, yet the tension from the afternoon lingered like a shadow. Alyssa drove slowly, letting her thoughts drift as she reflected on what had happened. The encounter in the alley replayed in her mind, not because it frightened her, but because it reminded her how easily assumptions could spiral into danger. She had faced threats before, much worse than a group of men thinking they could intimidate her, yet the way people reacted always fascinated her. Some people feared her without knowing her. Others judged her before they even spoke. Today had been a reminder of both. Meanwhile, back in the alley, the 5 men huddled together, whispering urgently. Marcus's pride was crushed. He had never felt so powerless, and it gnawed at him. "We can't just let it go," he said, his voice low but determined. "She humiliated us in front of everyone. People saw us." Trey, still nursing his bruises, shook his head. "Marcus, we're lucky she didn't call the cops on us. She could have done a lot worse." "That's exactly why we need to find out who she is," Marcus insisted. "We need to know what we're dealing with." "You think she's just some woman?" "No. She's something else. Something trained. Something dangerous." Leon frowned, rubbing his temple. "Man, I don't want any part of this. I've never seen anyone like that. I thought she was scared. I thought it'd be easy. I was wrong." Rico slammed his hand against the wall. "Yeah, easy to underestimate, huh? That woman could have crushed all of us if she wanted to." Dev, the youngest of the group, looked nervous. "Maybe we should just leave it alone. We already embarrassed ourselves. Isn't that enough?" Marcus glared at him. "No. It's never enough. People need to understand what happens when you mess with the wrong person. And I don't forget humiliation. Ever." Across the city, Alyssa returned home, parking her car in the underground garage. She unlocked the door to her apartment and stepped inside, letting the familiar quiet envelope her. She moved slowly, carefully setting her bag on the counter. Her mind was already analyzing the day, what went right, what could have gone wrong, and how she had stayed calm throughout the entire confrontation. It was almost reflexive now, a part of her she couldn't turn off even when she wasn't in uniform. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A new message from an unknown number appeared. "You think you can just walk away?" Alyssa's heart didn't race. She already knew who it was. Marcus. The leader. He wasn't done yet. He couldn't accept defeat. She read it carefully and typed back calmly, "You lost. Accept it." There was a pause. Another message arrived almost immediately, "This isn't over. You'll regret underestimating us." Alyssa set the phone down and sighed. She had dealt with threats like this before, both in training and during missions. She wasn't worried. She was ready. But she understood something Marcus didn't. His threats were nothing compared to the lessons he had just learned in the alley. She didn't need to respond with force. She just needed patience, observation, and strategy. That night, she reviewed her training notes, ran through techniques in her mind, and made sure her environment was secure. She wasn't paranoid, she was prepared. Outside, the city carried on unaware of what had occurred, the small alley now a memory in a neighborhood that didn't know the depth of Alyssa's skills. Yet, the knowledge of who she really was would eventually reach the right ears, and that truth would leave people stunned. As the lights dimmed in her apartment, Alyssa felt a strange calm wash over her. She hadn't sought recognition. She hadn't sought revenge. But she had shown that courage and preparation could turn the most dangerous situations into lessons, both for herself and for those who had underestimated her. Marcus and his group had learned something crucial today: appearances could deceive, and underestimating someone could have consequences they were not prepared to face. Finally, she leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. Tomorrow, the city would wake up again, people would go about their day, and life would continue. But somewhere, 5 men would be replaying the events of the alley over and over, realizing the truth too late. Alyssa smiled faintly. They had been shown mercy today, but the memory of her strength would haunt them for a long time. And she didn't even have to lift a finger again to make them understand. The next morning, Alyssa woke to the soft light of the sun spilling into her apartment. It was a calm, ordinary day, yet she knew the events of yesterday had changed something forever, not for her, but for those 5 men. She moved through her morning routine with quiet precision, making coffee, checking her messages, and scanning the news for anything unusual. Nothing stood out. The world seemed peaceful, unaware of the storm that had passed through a small alley just 24 hours ago. Meanwhile, Marcus sat in his small apartment, staring blankly at the wall. His pride had not healed overnight, and his friends had dispersed after avoiding further trouble. He couldn't shake the image of Alyssa, her calm, controlled movements, the way she had handled all 5 of them without hesitation, without fear, without malice. He kept repeating it in his mind, trying to rationalize it, but nothing made sense. How could one woman do what none of them could stop? Trey, Leon, Dev, and Rico were equally shaken. Each replayed the events over and over, the bruises and humiliation still fresh. They had underestimated her completely. For the first time, they realized that people weren't always what they seemed. The woman they thought was ordinary, harmless, was anything but. She was precise, powerful, and unyielding. And worse for them, she had not even needed to escalate. She had controlled everything with intelligence and skill. Back at her apartment, Alyssa prepared for a quiet morning walk. She wasn't reckless, but she wanted to reconnect with the normal world. The streets were busy but familiar, and she moved confidently, blending with the crowd as if nothing had happened. Yet she remained aware. Her training never allowed her to let down her guard completely. She noticed the way people walked, the sounds around her, the subtle changes in energy that often hinted at danger, or opportunity. As she passed a small cafe, she saw a familiar face. One of the neighbors who had witnessed the alley incident waved nervously. Alyssa smiled faintly and nodded. The woman whispered, You were amazing yesterday. Everyone is talking about it." Alyssa shook her head gently. "I was just protecting myself," she said softly. "That's all anyone should ever do." The woman seemed reassured but still awed. Alyssa continued walking, her steps calm but deliberate. She felt the weight of yesterday, but she refused to let it define her. Her life had always been about more than fear or confrontation. She had trained to protect, to survive, and to remain composed, and that training extended beyond uniforms, missions, or recognition. Meanwhile, Marcus, unable to contain himself, began reaching out to his contacts. He wanted to know who Alyssa really was. Rumors had started to spread in the neighborhood about the woman who took down 5 men alone. Some called her a martial arts expert, others whispered that she had military experience. Marcus scrolled through online forums, social media, and news feeds, desperate to find a name, a face, anything that would satisfy his need to understand what he had confronted. But Alyssa's life was private, her past classified, her skills honed in a world most would never see. Marcus would never find what he was looking for, not unless she wanted him to. And she didn't. As the day wore on, Alyssa returned home, carrying only a small bag with essentials. She locked the door behind her and stood in her quiet apartment, reflecting. She thought about the 5 men, their arrogance, and the lessons they had learned. They had assumed weakness where there was none. They had believed appearances could guide them. And they had been proven wrong. But she didn't feel triumph or satisfaction. She only felt calm clarity, the knowledge that she had protected herself, preserved her peace, and upheld her principles. That evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in deep orange and purple, she received a final text from Marcus's number: "We underestimated you. Never forget it." Alyssa didn't reply. She didn't need to. Her actions had spoken louder than any words could. She stood by the window, looking out at the city below. Life was moving forward, ordinary in its chaos, unremarkable to most, but she knew that sometimes, ordinary days contained extraordinary lessons. Yesterday had been one of those days. It had reminded her that courage was not about confrontation, but about control, awareness, and knowing your own strength. And for those who tried to misjudge others, it was a lesson they would never forget. With a deep breath, Alyssa turned away from the window. She would continue living her life quietly, moving through the world with grace, calm, and readiness. Trouble would find her again someday, it always did, but she was ready. Always ready. And for now, the city continued around her, unaware of the extraordinary woman who walked among them, ordinary in appearance but unstoppable in reality.